Welcome. My name is Mark Clevey, and I'm your host for the GLRA's Clean Energy Seminar. Tonight, we are going to be having a presentation by Phil Rausch, the Business Development Manager for Hemlock Semiconductor, and also a member of the Michigan Manufacturers Association Energy Policy Committee. He's also a recipient of MA's Emerging Leader Award. Phil's going to be talking about greening the entire solar supply chain. So I think it'll be one of very interesting. We kind of find that most people think about the solar supply chain as the guy they bought the solar system from, but the long global supply chains support that decision. Our financial sponsors tonight are the Michigan Department of Environmental and Great Lakes, Eagle, and McNaught and McKay Solar Company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Oops, come on. Should be going down. There it is. GLREA is celebrating its 30-year anniversary this year. We are supported by our members for the dues, and our members represent industry, solar users, solar educators, solar financiers, and solar politicians and thought leaders, as well as one or two gadflies laying around still from the old days. Our Zoom programs are actually part of a larger program, a solar storage program led by John Sarver. And every Thursday we give a presentation. First Thursday of each month is a solar case studies of solar systems in Ann Arbor, Michigan, given by Julie Roth, who's the manager of the Solarize Ann Arbor program. Second Tuesday of each month, it's myself doing the clean energy seminars. Third story of each month is Detroit Solar Stories, hosted by Diane Van Buren, who is a member of GLRA's board of directors and president of Zachary Associates. And she does case studies on interesting solar projects in the Detroit, Southeast Michigan area. And on the fourth Thursday of each month, we leave sort of open for a combination of questions and answers, and also solar stories from across the state. And that one is hosted by our esteemed John Sarver, who is our secretary. My Clean Energy Seminar, this tonight's, covers topics of interest to clean energy users, businesses, advocates, stakeholders. Seminar includes talks about technology, business to public policy, and public policy issues ranging from regulation to solar getting implemented at the local level. The CES is a Zoom event, goes on from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Any questions can be directed to me. My email is there. I ask you that if you please mute yourself and hold all your questions until the end of the presentation. If you go to the participant section, raise your hand under reactions, a hand will come up, you're moved to the front of the line, and I'll call on you for your question. There's a number of ways that you can get involved with GLREA. If you're not already a member, you can join or you can renew your member. You can financially sponsor someone else, a student or a teacher. We have a number of members who have been sponsored by their local community PTAs and others. You can help us grow our membership by helping to get others to join GLREA. We're up to 450 in terms of members now. And lastly, you can make a financial donation to GLREA to support our work. By contacting John Freeman, our executive director, and his email is below as well. So tonight it's my sincere pleasure to welcome Phil Rausch, Business Development Manager, Hemlock Semiconductor, and again, a member of the Michigan Manufacturers Association and Energy Policy Committee, and a recipient of MMA's Emerging Leader Award. In 2011, Andrew Liveris, chairman of Dow Chemical Company, Dow Chemical, published a book called Made in America. And it was aimed at those people who, in response to people who were thinking about selling off our industrial seed corn under globalization. If you remember back then, there were people who worked on a piece of machinery their whole life and were asked to stay there, dismantle that piece of machinery, put it in a box, put it on a truck, and that was their last official job before their job and their equipment got sent overseas. The Hemlock Semiconductor and Andrew Liveris was quite adamant that we shouldn't be doing that to the solar industry. And Dow Chemical and Dow Corning came together with Hemlock Semiconductor and launched Dow Solar. And you'll hear more about that tonight. the question of maintaining quality, where global players range from countries like China and Russia to others, and Canadian solar and the United States solar, et cetera, is very, very hard. Such quality is, however, essential to the ability of the solar industry to be able to produce and to deliver on our promises of being the agents of climate change mitigation. Within this context, tonight's presentation will discuss these challenges associated with greening the entire supply chain. And so, Phil, with that, I'd like to welcome you to the Clean Energy Seminar. And let me get out of screen sharing, and you can have this. Stop sharing. There we go.
So thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate the introduction. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, again, Phil Rausch with Hemlock Semiconductor. I started at Hemlock in 2008 as a chemical engineer, building out about $2 billion worth of capital assets to produce what is the purest man-made substance in the world, called polycrystalline silicon, specifically to service the solar supply chain. I've worked in our manufacturing plant for the first half of my career, and the second half of my career has been spent really in kind of strategy, finance, and commercial roles. Along those lines, I've also managed our energy purchases for the last 5-6 years, and have really learned markets, especially around electricity. So just to get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself personally. This picture of my wife and I in 2016, just before our first child was born, and we were part of the Solarize Michigan campaign. And looking back on it now, it's pretty exciting to think, we participated in this program when now Chairman Scripps and now Director Clark were running the Energy Innovation Business Council. And remember, now Chairman Scripps is actually crawling around on my roof, and two of us are figuring out how to put solar on it. So fast forward 5 years, and now he's the chairman of the Public Service Commission. So it's great to see a solar advocate on our regulatory commission. We installed solar on, we live in Midland. If you know anything about Midland, it has a lot of mid-century architecture. One of the really neat things about Alden Dow and his vision as an architect was that he really wanted to make sure that the indoors and outdoors were in harmony with each other. And I think this is just really an example of a 21st century add-on to his original vision. That's a little bit about my journey in solar, and want to take a minute to talk about Hemlock Semiconductor and who we are. This is a picture of our manufacturing site in Hemlock, Michigan. So if you're not familiar with Hemlock, Michigan, and it's one stoplight, it's about 6-7 miles west of the city of Saginaw in western Saginaw County. A really neat story about Hemlock Semiconductor in particular. We were founded in 1961, originally as a division of Dow Corning. The engineers and scientists at the time were trying to make single crystal ingots for the semiconductor industry to build the first IBM mainframes in the dawn of the electronics age. And they were doing it in Midland, Michigan, next to Dow and Dow Corning, but there was too much rail vibration. So they decided to do it at one of the scientists' barn on his farm in Hemlock. And that original site never moved. It just grew into a $3+ billion asset. Today we employ about 1,200 people on site. One of the really exciting things that we just announced about 2 months ago was we actually will no longer have a contract workforce. Historically, we've always used contract workforce for finishing and packaging of our material. we've now we're in the process of bringing about 500 employees in-house, and they will have all the same pay and benefit structure as the rest of us. And this is our one manufacturing site in Michigan. It's also our world headquarters and our corporate center. So every single employee that works for Hemlock works at this single facility. What are the industries in which we participate in? We were founded in 1961 to produce polysilicon. Again, it's the purest man-made substance in the world.
You're breaking up just a little bit, Phil. Phil, you're breaking up just a little bit. Lee, or if anybody else is not muted, please put your mute on so we're not getting any feedback that disrupts Phil. Okay?
Hear me better now? Yeah, so Hemlock Semiconductor participates in three sectors or three markets. The first is the semiconductor supply chain. We were founded in 1961 to produce the purest man-made substance in the world. This gray rock on the left is the material we produce. We are the refinery of the 21st century. We refine silicon that's mined out of the Earth's crust into the purest man-made substance in the world. Our customers pull what's called a single crystal. It's about a 500 kilogram single crystal, perfect lattice structure of silicon that a semiconductor chip is then built on top of. Our single site in Hemlock, Michigan supplies about a third of every computer chip in the world. So the iPhone that you have in your pocket or the computer that you're calling in on today most likely has Hemlock material in it. Additionally, we also supply to the solar supply chain. The same material is used as the fundamental building block of 95% of photovoltaic market in the world. And we have capacity to service about 10 gigawatts of supply here from Hemlock, Michigan. And then the third market that we're working on expanding into right now is the energy storage market. Graphite has traditionally been used as the anode in lithium-ion batteries, but we're running up against the energy capacity or charge density of graphite. And we've been able to figure out a way to combine silicon into that graphite to expand the charge density of the anode by 3x. We're really excited about this technology as we continue to scale it up going forward. So what do we specifically do and how to do it? I wanted to take a minute and just share a video with you because I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. A video is probably worth 1,000,000 words. So let me just flip over to that and show you. And Mark, if you can just give me a thumbs up when this plays.
Silicon, a nondescript gray metal born of flames, is a fascinating material. So intriguing, in fact, a California valley was named for it at the start of the computer boom. Silicon is a semiconductor. Elemental silicon is dark gray in color with a bronze to bluish metallic sheen. Available in various grades of purity, silicon is used in the metallurgical, photovoltaic, and microelectronics industries. Hyper-pure crystalline silicon is the starting material for microelectronic applications. It is also the raw material for solar cells. As with microelectronics, it is the semiconductor properties of silicon that are exploited in photovoltaic applications. After oxygen, silicon is the most abundant element in the Earth's crust, making up some 26%, mainly in the form of siliceous minerals or as pure silicon dioxide. The starting material for the production of hyperpure silicon is quartzite, a fine to medium-grained rock that is usually whitish-gray in color and consists almost exclusively of recrystallized silicon dioxide grains. However, it is a long way from quartzite to hyperpure polycrystalline silicon. In order to meet the high-tech requirements of the semiconductor and solar industries, the silicon has to undergo extensive processing and refining. Quartzite is a much sought-after raw material for silicon. The first step in the refining process begins in an electric arc furnace operating at a temperature of 2000 degrees centigrade, where the quartzite is reduced with coke to produce metallurgical-grade silicon. Waferinger's polysilicon production starts with metallurgical silicon. The first step in refining this raw material to hyperpure multicrystalline silicon is a fluidized bed reactor. Here, the silicon reacts with gaseous hydrogen chloride at about 350 degrees centigrade to form trichlorosilane, a liquid that boils at 31 degrees centigrade. After extensive distillation steps, the now hyperpure trichlorosilane is reduced by hydrogen at around 1100 degrees centigrade to form silicon again, which is deposited on electrically heated hyperpure silicon rods. Hyperpure elemental silicon grows on the rods in polycrystalline form until an ingot of specified diameter is obtained. This process takes roughly 1 week. The polycrystalline silicon, in short, polysilicon, is now so pure that there is only 1 foreign atom per 10 billion silicon atoms. That corresponds to a 1-cent coin on an area equivalent to 100 football fields. The ingots produced in this way are removed from the reactor and crushed. After the polysilicon has been broken up into chunks and graded, the material undergoes chemical surface refining before it is supplied to the electronics and photovoltaics industries. The sun's energy is captured by solar cells and converted into electricity. Because of ongoing energy policies in numerous industrial countries and escalating energy prices caused by dwindling reserves of fossil fuels, the solar power industry, fueled by photovoltaic technology, is on the verge of a spectacular boom. Over 90% of today's solar cells are made from crystalline silicon. Again, the starting material is polysilicon, which is processed according to various techniques. For multicrystalline solar cells, there are 3 main processing techniques: Bridgman, ribbon growing, and block casting. Once processed and refined, the silicon blocks and crystals are sliced into wafers, approximately 200 microns thick. These undergo further doping steps and are surface treated to reduce light reflection before being processed into finished solar cells. For power generation, usually a number of solar cells are connected together to form a module. As modern solar technology continues to become a more viable, clean, and sustainable source of energy, Wacker is leading the
So you can tell that video is a little bit old because, you know, the solar industry is not on the verge of a breakthrough anymore. It's broken through and it continues to accelerate. You know, our HSC is pretty unique, and in the video you saw this reactor system that looked like a giant Edison light bulb. That Edison light bulb is how we fundamentally grow polysilicon. We start with a seed rod of silicon from previous batch, and you resistively heat it with electricity. That electricity is used to break the chemical bonds of the trichlorosilane, and you're left with hyperpure silicon. And you can see that the diameter of this rod on the right is considerably larger than what we started with on the left. This is where we consume a tremendous amount of electricity in our process. And despite us using a lot of electricity, energy efficiency is paramount to our success. And I'll talk about kind of our energy profile at HSC and what it means to us. So to start, just want to talk about the size of our electricity load at Hemlock. We're the largest consumer of electricity in the state of Michigan by an order of magnitude. You know, this is a graph of Consumers Energy's single site electricity customers. I'm not sure who number 2 through 10 are, but if you add up number 2 through 10, they don't equal HSC's load. We represent about 25% of their industrial load and about 7% of their load statewide. We have this really unique profile where we utilize a process technology called chemical vapor deposition that act in that Edison light bulb, and it's driven by electricity. Electricity is an enormous cost component to our production. It represents about 40% of our cost of goods sold. And today we consume nominally 250 to 300 megawatts of instantaneous demand with capabilities to go up to 410 when we're running all out. You know, despite this load, we do have a really unique load profile. First of all, we have an extremely high load factor, meaning that we have extremely consistent usage of our load of electricity. We do not waver. It's very consistent. We have peak power load management, meaning when residential energy users consume more, we purposefully consume less to balance out the load, the system for consumers, and provide a net benefit to the grid. We also have enormous demand response capabilities. So think of peak power saver program that you get from your utility to adjust your thermostat. We do it, but it's basically we turn on an entire power plant for them instead of just knock down the temperature in your house a couple degrees. We also provide volt var control through our capacitor banks, and we participate in energy waste reduction projects every single year. We average probably 20 to 30 rebate projects into the Consumers Energy program every single year. And actually in 2016, we were the largest recipient ever of one of their programs. It's a $3 million capital project and considerable rebates paid back to Hemlock for that. Now, how do we do this? You know, Consumers Energy, like at home, and I'm sure DTE has similar programs, they need customers to reduce power usage when everybody else is, right? If we can manage the peaks of the system, we can more right size the energy system for all users. And in time of use rates, the red lines would represent weekday afternoons. That's when the system load is the highest and when energy prices are the highest. And we've been able to manipulate our process, and you can see our megawatts of demand go up and down by the blue. You can see every time those power costs and usage in the system goes up.
No.
We do this by managing our production and timing our production levels efficiently to capture that usage. And how do we do this physically? Well, we have really large intermediate inventory tanks in our process that can store up byproduct chemicals, and then we recycle them all, store them up throughout the week, and then recycle them all. This actually has created probably the second largest battery in the state. You know, we always think of batteries as storing electrons, but we can also think of it in terms of storing production timing. It's essentially a 500 megawatt hour, 20 megawatt battery that we've created out of the HSC physical assets that you can see on the bottom there. You know, this is kind of a picture of how the utilities set power usage rates. So during the months of the year across the top here, time of day on the y-axis, rates are highest in the summer, and then they're especially high in summer daytime when everybody's running their air conditioning. And then they're lower in the shoulder months, but still have this on-peak usage. This is a pretty backwards looking static way to look at it, but if you look at a heat map of what's going on with prices in the market, that's really not the case, and they change in real time all the time. Really, peak usage in the energy markets is really August afternoons, some into July and September. And we've worked with Consumers Energy to allow HSC to provide a grid service to consumers and its customers to really make more real-time LMP usage.
Thank you.
And we now manipulate our power usage based on those peak times, kind of shown in those boxes there. What does this mean for carbon, and really why I bring this up? We've been working with WattTime recently. WattTime is a wholly owned subsidiary of RMI that really looks at the concept of emissionality and when should industrial users be using electricity. When we started our journey on energy management, we basically did what the green line here shows. We ran our production flat out, consistent, same production every time of the day, all year round. As we started getting into understanding it, we would keep our production high on the weekends, drop it during the week. Then eventually we moved to what the yellow line shows, which is really high on the weekends, low during the day, ramp back up at night, and swing back and forth with production, or excuse me, with market signals. And you can see our actual performance, what our plant actually did in the blue. And WattTime in red shows the marginal operation emission rate of the MISO grid. So in Michigan, we're in the MISO service territory for the RTO. And what we see is when Hemlock ramps down, when Hemlock ramps up, emissions on the system are going down. And we've been able to match, and the key distinction and what I want people to take away from this slide is not only have we been able to figure out when carbon is going down in the system and utilize lower carbon times on the system for production, but it's also a cost saving. Increasingly in the manufacturing sector, we are seeing when you take actions to reduce cost, they're reducing carbon. When you take actions to reduce carbon, they reduce cost. This is a breakthrough for industry. This, does not mean that I need to have a carbon price, an internal carbon price to calculate my actions. It means I can use real dollars and cents in the marketplace to control.
Oh God!
Send a signal to me to take the right actions on carbon. We've been able to show about a 2% reduction, that may sound modest, but as MISO continues to go towards more and more renewables, we will see that factor go up because we've been able to take our data and overlay, hey, if we were in California or in SPP, where there's a lot higher solar renewables penetration, we've actually seen that we would be having more like a 20 or 30% impact on our carbon, not just 2. So it's important for industry to start paying attention to real-time carbon and price signals in the market. But one of the other services that we've been able to provide to the grid is interruptible management. Increasingly, we're seeing the effects of climate change create these really extreme weather events. Actually, MISO, the electrical transmission operator in the the continent is seeing both winter and summer peaks. This was actually one of the really big events at the end of January in 2019, when the entire state nearly shut down with both electricity and gas emergencies. We provided 75 megawatt load shed in the course of 30 minutes. We've actually increased our interruptible capacities. We were interrupted once earlier this summer and provide a huge demand response opportunity to the grid for those services so that we don't see those emergencies and blackout events. So what does all this mean in terms of solar, and how can you take action as solar customers and advocates in the solar community? You know, one of the things I want to stress upon the audience is all solar is good, but some solar is better. And if you have the option to buy better solar. I've been talking a lot about the polysilicon industry because that's where we participate. After us, again, in the video, talked about ingots and wafers, and then cells, and then finally assembly into a module. You can see the production. Blue is the US, red is China, and green is the rest of the world, and where that manufacturing was happening in 2005. And you can see the drastic change in 2020. So this is not an anti-China story by any means, but just impact on carbon and other ESG initiatives that we all want to see exemplified in our value chain. You know, 82% of the world's polysilicon is now coming out of China. Over 55% alone is out of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. Issue is it's all coal-fired, co-located coal-fired power plants with serious allegations of forced labor and a lack of resiliency in the supply chain. Furthermore, you can see the significant concentration in the ingot wafer sector, with 96% of the ingot wafer manufacturing happening inside of China, but still really significant concentration in cell and module. To give you perspective, the pie charts on the right are 100 times larger than the pie charts on the left. This industry has grown 100x, but all of the economic capture has been inside of one country. And we're seeing, you know, as the US continues to install solar, upwards of 25 gigawatts right now, we're becoming increasingly dependent on energy imports, which used to be dominated by oil from the Middle East, now being dominated by solar from China, which is presenting us with a lot of issues around consistent delivery of products and the geopolitical risks of the US and China. And it's increased carbon emissions from manufacturing in carbon-intensive grid locations. This was a study done by Argonne National Lab and Northwestern University. Dr. Anstill out of Michigan State University has recently updated this. But the findings are, you know, production of solar modules inside of China have twice the embodied carbon or carbon emissions from manufacturing as modules made outside of China. And really what we're looking at is, what does that mean for the upfront carbon emission, and what impact does that have? I'm going to walk through just a report that was published by NREL just a month ago. You know, we can increasingly see reports from the IPCC and others on really this concept of how imperative it is to focus on the time value of carbon. And, you know, one unit of emissions today does not have the same impact on global temperature potential as it does 25 years from now. This unit of emission today has much more impact on global temperature changes than if we take out an equivalent unit 25 years from now. And what it really shows is that that unit of emission in time zero can have a 55% greater impact on global temperature reduction. And that's why that embodied carbon in the solar panel matters. So even if, that's why you hear about, even if all emissions stop today, you would still have future temperature increases. Because there's still carbon in the air today that we've released that is still going to have an effect. But if we can take it out today, we can have earlier impacts on climate change. When we look at the photovoltaic supply chain, like I said, all solar is good. The operational emissions of a coal-fired power plant are about 1,000 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And on a levelized cost of energy basis, photovoltaics are 40. 40 to 1,000 is really good, but you can have even better by choosing the right solar. And we see pretty large differences in the data of embodied carbon. So what NREL did was they looked at a harmonized set of values of carbon emissions in manufacturing from over 200 different studies, and looked at how wide-ranging the embodied carbon in those photovoltaics can be. And what they were able to show was nearly a 10x difference between the worst and best in class. And again, what kind of an impact does this have on the solar that you buy? The net climate benefit can be as high as a 55% increase just on the impact to global temperature rise. You may say, Phil, at the end of the day, all solar is good. How impactful is this? What I want to share with you today is solar is broken through. It is the leading source of new electricity capacity worldwide. It accounted for over 50% of all new electrical infrastructure installed in the United States last year. The US market continues to grow year over year. Today, the carbon emission impact from the global solar PV sector is about 0.3 gigatons of carbon in comparison to aluminum today at 2.1. If we stay on the current trajectory and just keep up with the pace of solar growth and don't change how we manufacture solar, the solar industry will be about 2 gigatons in the future. So solar today is about a third of aluminum. Solar in 2040 will be the same as aluminum. So we've got a huge opportunity to avoid a significant amount of emissions by making sure that we're procuring better solar with lower embodied carbon. So how do we do this? One of the things that HSC is actively working on and trying to pull off with our majority owner Corning, is creating a domestic solar PV value chain and doing much more of the solar manufacturing here in the United States. What is the impact and how does it embody the administration's Build Back Better campaign? First of all, it creates a just energy transition and creates manufacturing jobs right here in the United States and in Michigan in particular. If you built out the solar supply chain to serve the US market, talking about 25,000 direct manufacturing jobs and about 125,000 indirect. We also decrease our dependency on energy imports. We eliminate supply chain risk surrounding allegations tied to forced labor. One of the big disruptions in the market over the last 2 months was the issuance of a withhold release order by Customs and Border Protection that would eliminate any imports of solar that contained Hochstein silicon, which has been tied to allegations of forced labor. And then additionally, it reduces supply chain emissions, and as have shown previously, production in the US have a 55% increase on its climate change mitigation impact. Now, I really view this as an opportunity for a holistic energy transition. Increasingly, Joe Manchin is right. We do have to look out for the worker along the way as we retire coal and move towards renewables. This is an opportunity for significant economic development in the United States, energy security and resiliency, and even better environmental performance. So how specifically do you support this? I think one is you leverage existing U.S. manufacturing capacity. You as customers send demand signals for sustainably manufactured solar. You can ask your suppliers for the embodied carbon. Manufacturers have it because other jurisdictions around the world and markets, particularly France, Korea, Norway, demand carbon footprint disclosures in their reporting, and then integrate U.S. supply chain procurement into other demands for domestic manufacturing. One of the things that the market is working on right now is a new eco label called EPEAT plus ultra low carbon solar that really looks at a multi attribute sustainability scorecard for solar, which will be released in Q2 of next year. Mark, I think I hit your time for
person.
questions and wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity to ask questions.
Outstanding. You actually bought 3 extra minutes. So excellent presentation. Let me again ask people to mute unless you're speaking. So that's a couple of you. Lee Snyder, if you could put your thing on mute, I would have very much appreciate it. Clyde Taylor, you too, please put your thing on mute. John Weaver, you too, if you'd put it on mute, I'd appreciate it. We can take questions. Again, if you go to reaction section, raise your hand. I'll call on you. I guess a couple things that I think are great. Bill, I reread the Make It in America book for your presentation, and it's amazing to me how here we are 40 years later, and the Hemlock Semiconductor is even doing even much better. I guess I hadn't realized that China had just taken such a commanding lead in this stuff. It's a little frightening. So, but it's good to see that. My one simple question is the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance. That's a real thing. We can go Google that and see about that. Is that correct?
Correct. So the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance, Hemlock is a member. There's many other manufacturers, all the way from polysilicon, ingot wafer, cell module. But yeah, there's a lot of great content on that website that we've published and other actions that can be taken.
Super. Okay, thank you. So, John Sarver, you're up first.
Yeah. Hey, Phil, great presentation. Very interesting. I'm just wondering, is there anything that the state of Michigan government can do to kind of help in this area, or is this primarily an area where the federal government has to help?
Yeah, so you went a little faint at the end, but I think the question was around state government can help and federal government help. So from a state perspective, it's been pretty exciting seeing the administration work on 100% renewable energy supply. We're actively working with the utilities on how do you do that and how do you get probably through the voluntary green pricing programs that the utilities provide is the way the state will do it. But we're in active communication with the state on making sure that they're buying the right solar. The other thing on the federal side is, as part of the proposed reconciliation package, Senator Ossoff and Stabenow from Georgia and Michigan co-sponsored a piece of legislation called the Solar Energy Manufacturing for America's Act, or SEMA for short, that would provide a production-linked incentive to jumpstart the U.S. value chain and really try to catch up with China to a great extent and build out those missing links in the value chain so that we can have a domestic energy source here.
Excellent. Lee, Andrew, you're up.
Yeah, so what's the source of the carbon that's used in the initial refinement of the silicon oxide? And the second question is it possible to substitute hydrogen as this oxygen scavenger for that process?
Yeah, so good question. We source our silicon dioxide either from Quebec, the US, or Brazil. Fortunately, both Quebec and Brazil have very hydro-driven electricity sources, so it keeps our carbon footprint pretty low to begin with. I think in Brazil, they typically use charcoal from a managed forest of fast growth poplar trees that's continuously replanted. And then I'm not sure if they're using like coke or another form of charcoal in Quebec and in the US to reduce. That when we've done multiple, we redo our third-party verified LCA about every year or two. And the metallurgical grade silicon, we go cradle to gate on our LCA. So we have to go back to the mining, the reduction process. That represents about 25% of our carbon footprint.
Oh, so you don't have the in-house, the vertical integration down to the sand level?
No, the reduction process is done at the mine so that you don't have to transport the oxygen.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Great. John Richter, you're up.
Oh, I had the same question, so I took my hand down. It's exactly the same thing.
Excellent.
I noticed that video, was that a Wacker video that you shared with us?
Yeah, that was. Wacker and Hemlock have both been in the industry for 60 years or so. They're a German competitor of ours, but great company, great technology, have a very similar carbon footprint.
Yeah, their smelting is in Norway, which you use in hydroelectric power, just the way that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So, Phil, when I was working on a project, I was talking to you about it in Saginaw. We were trying to get the auto manufacturers to start making wind machine parts and solar things and stuff. So we did this interesting project, and at the time, Dow Solar was looking at working with states to bring about more solar activities and obviously sell more solar and stuff. And they did a study and they targeted 10 states as ideal places for them to invest dollars to help those states develop, good solid solar policies and start buying more solar and doing more solar. And I was amazed at the time that Michigan was not on the list of the top 10. And I remember talking to them saying, it's just the regressive state policies were so much that it just wasn't worth the investment of dollars in Michigan to do that. Has that changed? It's like, we got the auto manufacturers going on, but people don't buy, cars made in Michigan. It's like that with Hemlock. I think here we have all the solar, one of the biggest solar companies in the world right here in Midland. You'd think that Michigan would be the number one solar company in the state in the world, leading the policies of how to, collapse collaborate with one of the leading manufacturers in the world. And here we are, you know, put that in a nice way. What's, you know, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What's Hemlock Semiconductor think about Michigan? It's probably a great place to do business. You got educated employees. Consumers Energy, I'm sure, treats you with kid gloves and lots of champagne. But you know, are we buying your products? And if not,
Yeah,
what do we need to do?
yeah, good question. So, you know, first of all, what I would say is, you know, as the solar industry has grown and matured, one of the things that's happened, you know, consistently year over year over year is that the price has come down. And as prices come down and efficiencies go up, it makes environments like Michigan really attractive for solar. You know, we now have two, you know, the two biggest utilities in the state, Consumers and DTE, both have net zero carbon commitments. You know, DTE has very, very ambitious goals to get there. And in particular, Consumers in their most recent integrated resource plan filing has committed to, I think, 8 to 10 gigawatts of installations in the state. So you're seeing enormous commitment to go solar in Michigan. You know, I think maybe to directly answer your question, Mark, the biggest kind of issue in the solar energy space right now is, despite this industry having enormous market share worldwide, we have not localized supply chains, and we've concentrated the supply chain into China, to where it has a chokehold. And
Yeah.
you know, the United States alone is 25 gigawatts plus a year right now, growing to probably 50, 55 gigawatts by 2050. As installation bases get that large, classical economics would tell you that the supply chain should localize to where the install base is
Yes.
happening. You know, the knock-on benefit of that is jobs, carbon reduction through transportation, and increase in resiliency of supply, because you don't have to worry about geopolitical trade barriers constantly. So I think, you know, those key things that I listed out in the last slide is the best way to help. One, it's ask your manufacturers who's got Hemlock poly in it, who's got Western, who's got low carbon polysilicon in their supply chain. I can tell you that right now, that's Maxion, Q Cells, JA Solar. Those are the ones I can publicly announce, but you know, there's other ones that we can definitely work to source here in the US. And we need to show a demand signal to the market and prove that the demand is here for that US supply.
So two things about that. One, I remember when I was working in the energy office in the state, we were working with Joanne Crary. We went and visited with the auto manufacturers to talk about getting their suppliers into the wind and solar manufacturing in the supply chain, and the importance of supply chains. And I remember it was basically a pat on my head from one of the VPs saying, "Well, you know, Mark, let me just be honest with you. We don't need a local supply chain. If you want your local suppliers to be, then you know you need to do something about that, because we source globally and that we're nationally, and so let's assume that Hemlock Semiconductor's low carbon alliance is unbelievably successful. The Biden money comes down and this money flows into the United States. How do we, GLREA and working with Hemlock Semiconductor, make sure that the vast majority of those dollars flow into Michigan and rebuild Michigan's local supply chain? Because, you know, I'm sure you would say the same thing. We don't need a local supply chain, Mark. We need a supply chain in the United States. You need a local supply chain because you need local companies. But so it is in our interest. And we've got upwards to 50 solar businesses in our membership. I should like to make them aware of the low carbon solar alliance and where they can buy products. So, at a minimum, we can start pushing at our end that, this money's coming. We're reshoring the industry, and if you're going to play in this industry, you got to be clean.
Yeah.
So
To your point, to your question, and then I'll answer Bridget's question in the chat here too. So she's
Yes.
asking, are there more sustainable solar panels made all or mostly in the U.S.? And if yes, how does cost compare to non-U.S. competitors? How do we find them? Couple things. One, it's a great question because I'm actively negotiating a supply contract with a customer that has U.S. operations right now, and I actually asked them for the rights to purchase 500 megawatts per year. Specifically, just Hemlock would be the person that holds them in Michigan and work with your companies and others. Hemlock's got a warehouse full of panels that were made in Michigan, so on and so forth. I don't want to mark them up. I just want to be able to supply them to your members as a direct buy. So we're working on that, and we'll continue to update you on that. In terms of modules produced in the United States and sustainable solar modules, so there's about 17 to 20 gigawatts of polysilicon capacity. Hemlock's got about 10. Wacker and REC Silicon out in the Pacific Northwest combined for another 7 of U.S. manufacturing. There's 0 ingot wafer manufacturing in the United States, 0 cell, and there's about 5 to 6 gigawatts of modules made in the U.S. There's 2 gigawatts from Hanwha Q cells in Georgia, maybe another gigawatt in Tennessee or Georgia from LG. And then there's a decent amount of thin film manufacturing from First Solar, CAD-TEL technology. There are people today that bid into, so for example, France, anytime you bid on a PPA price in France, it's weighted 70% cost, 30% carbon. And when you combine those two in that weight, that's the winner. And there are people today that certify panels using Hemlock material to bid into that market. We can get you a list of those companies, but you can start asking for those certifications today.
Yes. Yeah, we'd like that list, actually. That'd be a good list to have.
I didn't answer the second half of this question. So cost. Hemlock, I sell at market prices that compete with China today. And we've been able to learn how to manufacture over the last 60 years through efficiencies to compete with China, regardless of subsidies or anything else. So, as we continue to look at facilitating a build out of the U.S. supply chain, we believe it can be cost competitive to do the other steps here as well.
Great. I got 2 more questions. John Richter, you're up.
Yeah, I'm curious, what about the effect of the tariffs that have been put on Chinese cells? Has that been helpful or just disruptive or what? What's your take on that?
So that when you say tariffs, it's a loaded question because there's a lot of tit for tat measures back and forth. So first of all, I have a 57% import duty on Hemlock poly going into China, so I'm not allowed to sell into China. The U.S. has anti-dumping and countervailing duty placed on Chinese solar coming into the U.S. So therefore, Chinese companies have relocated to other Southeast Asian nations to do only module and cells. There's also 201 and 301 import duties on other components globally coming into the US. What I would say, it's a hard question to answer, right? Because it kind of depends on what's your priority. I think if anything, it has done a great job to highlight some of the issues in the solar supply chain and has gotten people to react. Unfortunately, the tariffs have not stretched far enough back in the value chain to really fill in those other steps and make it more resilient. It's only affected module, the assembly piece. It hasn't gone back into the material supply.
Interesting. Lee, you get the last question, my friend.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is there a simple answer that we can tell our customers that the energy ROI for solar panels is 2 years or 18 months? You know, how long does it take a solar panel in a normal installation to produce enough power to pay back the energy that it took to make it? And the second question is, are we approaching a direct wafer program where we can get rid of the saw curve and increase the efficiency of our ultra pure silicon significantly by making the wafer directly?
Yeah, two great questions. I can tell you from personal experience on the first one, when I did remember when I installed solar on my house, I was in the finance team at Hemlock, so I better have figured this out, right? I went with a Michigan Saves loan, and including the cost of the loan, I was right about 7 years on the financial ROI. In terms of carbon return on investment, you're at 6 months to 9 months in net payback. On your second question in direct wafering, this is kind of the holy grail of R&D for solar that's been looked at forever. There are companies out there like 1366, Leading Edge Crystal Technologies. There was one in Freeland for a while called Evergreen that looked at ribbon manufacturing. They've all, one of the issues is the industry has gone to monocrystalline wafers to make higher and higher efficiency cells. Nobody has been able to figure out direct kerfless wafer that's mono or mono-like. It's all been multi-crystalline when they've made the direct wafer. So I guess I would be surprised to see it because the kerf loss is coming down as the diamond wire gets thinner and thinner, as well as the wafer gets thinner and thinner. So your gram per watt efficiency when I started at Hemlock 13 years ago was probably 6 to 7 grams per watt, and we're seeing less than 3 grams per watt of silicon nowadays. Kind of the next technology cycle that I guess I foresee on the horizon will be TOPCon cells is kind of where people are thinking right now in the next 3 to 5 years, and then maybe in 10 to 15 years, it's really the idea of like a tandem cell with silicon and thin film together, or silicon and perovskites together. That's kind of the stuff that NREL is working on right now.
Outstanding. Well, Phil, I want to thank you so very, very much. You've been a delightful speaker, and you've been really entertaining as well as a very informative on stuff, and gives us a lot to think about. But I think it helps inform some of our thinking going forward. A lot of us, including myself and Bridget McCumber, we're in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor spending lots and lots of our tax dollars stimulating solar and stuff and bringing solar contractors in. And I know for a fact that not one of the contractors that are participating in Ann Arbor's solarized program is using low carbon silicon. So it gives us a thought of, something to think about going forward. I hope that we can
Mark.
engage with you on this subject going forward. Yes, somebody wanted me. Is that David?
Yes,
Yes.
Phil said Q-cell was low carbon, and we buy Q-cell by the truckload.
Okay, I'm sorry. I stand corrected.
We have for several of these last few years.
Okay, I'm sorry. I stand correct.
We
David
got
Fredericks,
it.
Home Solar, is one of the ones that are
come
doing
see
the
it. You can come see a truckload or two right on Jackson Road.
I will. I'll come see you about that. Okay, but that's really important to know, David. That's good. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming and being part of this. The presentation will be on our YouTube channel. And again, if you are not a member of GLREA, please go to GLREA.org and sign up. If you want to do us a favor and send us a check, we'd love that too. We're working in the legislature, we're working in education, we're doing everything we can to do, in the words of our good friend Julie Baldwin at the Public Service Commission, we want to speed up the solar train. So with that, John Freeman.